Thank God he is just amenable to what I want. He wants me to be happy,
Wow.
and it was okay.
Ina Garten's life always looked perfect. The food, the marriage, the calm. But now, she's saying goodbye. And no one saw it coming. Her husband's emotional crisis, her hidden health scares, the shocking truth about her childhood, and the moment she almost walked away from it all.
We don't fight. We don't. I think it's more because Jeffrey wants whatever I want. So it's pretty hard to fight with somebody.
For years, she hid the real story behind the recipes, until now. What made America's most comforting woman finally break her silence? And what dark secrets has she been carrying all this time? The answers will change how you see her forever. Let's go. The face of calm. Who we thought Ina Garten was, she made you feel safe. That was her power. Ina Garten wasn't just another celebrity chef. She was the woman who made roast chicken feel like therapy and dinner parties look effortless. When the world was on fire, she poured a giant martini and told you everything would be okay. But what if it wasn't? What if behind the calm voice, the perfectly folded napkins, and the warm glow of her Hamptons kitchen, there was something she never told us? Why is she suddenly stepping back? And what happened to her husband that changed everything? For over 2 decades, Ina Garten has been the queen of quiet confidence. While others scrambled for viral attention or dramatic flair, Ina offered something entirely different: control. On her show, Barefoot Contessa, she would calmly walk you through making a chocolate ganache or a perfect beef stew, all while chatting with her friends or prepping for a casual dinner with Jeffrey, her husband of over 50 years. Whether you were going through a breakup or just burned out by the news cycle, you knew you could turn on Ina and disappear into a world where nothing ever went wrong. And people clung to that, especially in moments of collective panic. The 2008 crash, Trump-era politics, and most memorably, the pandemic. When the world shut down in 2020, Ina didn't disappear. In an Instagram video that went instantly viral, she made a massive cosmopolitan cocktail in a giant glass.
2 cups of vodka, good vodka, and a big pitcher. Just pour it right in.
And declared, "It's always cocktail hour in a crisis." That post alone reached millions, cementing her as more than a food icon. She was emotional infrastructure. But here's the strange thing about calm. Sometimes it's a shield. People assumed Ina was peaceful because her life was peaceful. The truth was, something Ina kept far from the camera. And in recent months, that truth has started to leak out. Looking back, you realize how rarely she ever let us see behind the scenes. Yes, she invited cameras into her home, but it was always her version of home. Carefully curated, always serene. Even her friendships on screen, whether with actor friends like Rob Marshall or old pals like Eli Zabar, were light, uncomplicated, and full of laughter. She didn't share breakdowns. She didn't cry on television. She didn't talk about anxiety or pain or trauma. And unlike so many other celebrities, she never did a deep dive podcast interview to open up. She kept things tightly sealed. So tightly, in fact, that few people noticed when subtle signs started to appear. A pause in cookbook releases, a few skipped TV appearances. Her tone in recent interviews shifted, slightly, but noticeably. Less jokey, more reflective. And while her fanbase continued to adore her, some began to wonder, is everything really okay? I asked for a separation. The marriage that nearly fell apart. In one of the most unexpected revelations of the year, Ina Garten, the woman millions believed had the perfect marriage, has admitted something that stopped everyone in their tracks. She once asked her husband, Jeffrey, for a separation. That's not a rumor. It's not speculation. It's straight from Ina herself, revealed for the first time in her brand new memoir. For decades, Their relationship had been portrayed as unshakable, sweet, steady, and almost unreal in how tender it seemed. But behind the camera, at the very height of their public image as America's favorite couple, their marriage was hanging by a thread. This moment, deeply personal, deeply painful, wasn't just a minor disagreement or a rough patch. Ina wanted distance. She needed space. And Jeffrey, blindsided by the request, had no choice but to confront the fact that the woman he loved felt trapped. The woman known for throwing garden parties and telling viewers to make it ahead had reached a breaking point. She wasn't just overwhelmed, she was emotionally cornered. And for the first time in their decades-long relationship, she wanted out. Not forever, but long enough to breathe. So why did she ask? The answer is more layered than it seems. At the time, Jeffrey was constantly traveling for work. His high-profile roles, including time spent as a policy expert in Washington and later as a professor and dean at Yale, kept him away from home for long stretches. Ina, meanwhile, was building her food business.
Ina Garten is one of the most famous and beloved cooks in America today.
Developing her identity and running the Barefoot Contessa store. She wasn't the same woman Jeffrey had married in 1968, and as she evolved, she began to feel boxed in, emotionally and socially. Their marriage, for all its affection, started to feel like a framework she hadn't fully chosen. Ina has said that traditional roles began to weigh her down. People expected her to be a perfect host, a perfect wife, always cheerful, always accommodating. But real life didn't feel that simple. At home, she was handling everything alone: the business, the house, the emotional labor. And with Jeffrey gone so often, she started to feel not just isolated, but invisible. In her own words, the woman who cooked to comfort others wasn't sure who was comforting her.
No pressure.
Am I trying one?
That's what Lynn and I were.
Oh my God.
How do you do that?
They're so crisp.
Hey, Rob, is
They're
that
so
pregnant?
amazing.
Jeffrey didn't see it coming. To him, the marriage felt stable, loving, familiar. But Ina's request jolted him into action. Instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, he did something rare. He listened. He began seeing a therapist, alone, to better understand how he could show up differently, more present, more supportive, more attuned to the woman Ina had become. That choice helped bring them back from the edge. But it was also the moment that forced Ina to confront what she had been carrying for decades, not just as a wife, but as a daughter. What kind of pain do you have to carry to walk away from the one person who's always been your anchor? Because this wasn't just about marital strain. The deeper story, the one Ina is only now beginning to share, is rooted in her childhood. In her memoir, she reveals something that's as shocking as it is devastating. She grew up afraid that her own father might hurt her. Not metaphorically, physically. She describes locking herself in her bedroom just to feel safe. He wasn't just strict or cold. He was unpredictable, angry, and, in her words, terrifying. As a child, she didn't feel protected. She didn't feel loved. She felt like she had to tiptoe through her own home. As for her mother, she wasn't violent, but she was emotionally absent. Ina says her mother showed little interest in connection or comfort, and actively discouraged any expression of creativity or vulnerability. If Ina got excited about something, food, for example, her mother would quickly shut it down. As Ina puts it, warmth wasn't part of their household vocabulary. Over time, she began to wonder if her mother might have been neurodivergent, possibly on the autism spectrum, exhibiting traits often associated with what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. There was structure, there was intelligence, but there wasn't emotional understanding. It's this childhood, cold, volatile, and emotionally unsafe, that shaped everything about the adult Ina Garten. This background also explains one of the most polarizing choices Ina and Jeffrey ever made: their decision not to have children. In the past, Ina had simply said it was a personal choice. But now we know it wasn't just a matter of preference. It was a deep, emotional decision shaped by fear and trauma. Ina has admitted that her own upbringing was so damaging, so emotionally unstable, that she couldn't imagine bringing a child into the world without repeating that cycle. She didn't trust the idea of motherhood, not because she thought she'd be bad at it, but because she had never seen it done with love. She once said bluntly, "I couldn't understand why people had kids." For some, that might sound harsh, but for Ina, it was honest. If your only example of parenting is mistreatment or absence, then the entire concept of family starts to feel like a risk, not a gift. Even her relationship with Jeffrey, as strong and loving as it appears now, was once in danger of crumbling under the weight of all that unspoken pain. And when Ina finally cracked the door open, asking for space, what she was really doing was signaling that she couldn't carry it alone anymore. That was the real beginning of her transformation, not just as a public figure, but as a person finally coming to terms with a childhood she had buried for over 60 years. Health scares, emotional walls, and the pain of being strong. It started with chest pain, not the kind you can ignore, the kind that forces everything to stop. Ina Garten was rushed to the hospital, afraid she was having a heart attack. The tests were urgent, invasive. The results, inconclusive. Then came another blow, a potential cancer diagnosis. Two possibilities, back to back, delivered with all the cold detachment of clinical language. But here's the twist: neither of them turned out to be accurate. There was no heart attack. There was no cancer. What Ina was experiencing wasn't physical disease. It was the accumulated weight of years, maybe even decades, of unprocessed emotional pain. These weren't just isolated health scares. They were the physical manifestation of a life spent holding things in. Years of smiling through interviews.
And she turned out to be the movie critic for the Pittsburgh newspaper.
There you go.
And I thought, she did it.
What were you doing at 10?
Maintaining a flawless public image and never letting anyone know what she was really carrying. The body has a language of its own. And in Ina's case, it was screaming what her voice had stayed quiet about for so long. Something is wrong. Something has always been wrong. When Jeffrey got the call about her health crisis, he was overseas. Without hesitation, he dropped everything and flew back to be with her. That moment, simple as it seems, was pivotal. It reminded them both what mattered. But more importantly, it pushed Ina to finally stop minimizing her own pain. Not just the anxiety of being a public figure or the loneliness that sometimes comes with fame, but the deeper stuff, the unresolved childhood trauma, the emotional walls she'd built to keep herself safe, the carefully constructed silence she'd maintained her whole life. And that's when she began to write. Not recipes, not hosting tips, but something she had never shared before, her own truth, the thoughts she never spoke on television, the memories she tried to forget. The fears she buried so deeply they started to look like personality traits. Perfectionism, quietness, control. It all began to come out. In interviews, she's admitted that the memoir process was unlike anything she'd ever done. It wasn't just a book. It was therapy.
Creative force behind the Barefoot Contessa cookbooks and TV shows, William Brangham recently went to see Ina Garten at her home on Long Island, New York.
A confrontation. A war, a way to finally name things she had spent a lifetime avoiding. But that doesn't mean the wounds are gone. Ina has spoken about how those childhood scars still shape her, how the voice in her head, the critical, demanding one, still sounds like her mother. How hard it is to believe you deserve gentleness when you grew up with silence and disapproval. These aren't things you grow out of. They're things you learn to live beside. The heart scare, the cancer scare, the sudden clarity they brought. These weren't coincidences. They were warnings. And Ina finally listened. That's why her latest project isn't a cooking show or a holiday guide. It's a book about herself. There's a scene she describes where she's sitting alone, overwhelmed, trying to write about something painful from her childhood. She couldn't get the words out. Not because she didn't remember, but because she'd never allowed herself to feel those memories as real. That moment, sitting there in the quiet, letting the sadness come through, was when she realized she wasn't writing to tell a story. She was writing to finally tell herself the truth. Behind the apron. The pressure of reinvention. Long before Ina Garten was known for her chocolate ganache cakes and delicate place settings, she was deep in the heart of the United States government, working in one of the most demanding, emotionally detached environments imaginable, the White House Office of Management and Budget. This was the 1970s. Ina wasn't a culinary icon. She wasn't even sure who she was. She was a young woman in her 20s, doing analytical work on nuclear energy policy, surrounded almost entirely by men. Every decision she contributed to involved numbers, projections, bureaucratic planning, but absolutely no warmth. So, how does someone go from calculating energy forecasts in Washington to baking scones in the Hamptons? It sounds like a reinvention story, and in a way, it is. But reinvention makes it sound intentional, like a choice made with clarity and purpose. The truth is much more complicated. Ina didn't leave government because she had a dream. She left because she was suffocating. She's spoken openly about how she felt completely disconnected from the work. She was good at it, respected, but she came home every night feeling hollow. She couldn't see how her efforts were changing anything, and more than that, she couldn't see herself in any of it. She was invisible in her own life. There's a specific kind of emotional fatigue that builds in spaces like that. It's not just about stress or long hours. It's the feeling that your entire sense of self is shrinking to fit a mold that was never meant for you. Ina has said she would sit at her desk and feel like her life was happening somewhere else. She had always been responsible, always done what was expected. The good grades, the stable job, the secure marriage. But that version of adulthood wasn't working anymore. It didn't match what she actually wanted, even if she couldn't yet articulate what that was. So, one day, she made what looked like an impulsive decision. She found a small classified ad for a specialty food store in the Hamptons. It was called the Barefoot Contessa. She and Jeffrey went to look at it, and just like that, she bought it. No formal business experience, no culinary education, no roadmap. On paper, it made no sense. Why would a high-performing federal budget analyst drop everything to run a gourmet food shop in a beach town? The answer isn't that she was following a dream. The answer is burnout. Ina wasn't chasing something. She was running from something else, from a version of herself that felt scripted, restricted, and numbing. She didn't just want a new job. She needed a different life. One with color, with texture, with people. Something tactile, something real. Cooking, she realized, gave her that. It wasn't just about food. It was about feeling, something her past environment had systematically stripped away. At first, the store was overwhelming. Ina was used to policy memos and budget meetings. Now she was managing staff, ordering ingredients, navigating customer complaints, and waking up at dawn to prep the deli counter. And the pressure to succeed was intense, not because anyone was watching, but because she was watching. She had no credentials in this new world. Every day felt like a test. What if the staff lost faith in her? What if the customers stopped coming? What if she failed and had to crawl back to DC in shame? This is where her imposter syndrome took root, quietly but persistently. She's talked about this in interviews, how for years she felt like she was just pretending to know what she was doing. Despite a growing customer base and a glowing reputation, she couldn't silence the thought that one day someone would call her out, tell her she didn't belong in a kitchen, that she wasn't really a chef, she didn't have a culinary degree, she didn't go to Le Cordon Bleu, she wasn't trained, and in her mind, that disqualified her, even as she was running one of the most successful gourmet food stores on the East Coast. But there was something else going on beneath that fear. It wasn't just that she didn't feel qualified, it's that she didn't feel entitled to succeed. People who grow up in emotionally unstable homes, especially those who experience mistreatment or neglect, often internalize the idea that good things aren't for them, that success, recognition, even peace are meant for other people. So when those things begin to appear, they don't feel earned. They feel like a trick. Like any minute, someone will knock on the door and say, "This wasn't meant for you." Ina carried that fear with her for years, even after she sold the store, even after the cookbooks hit the bestseller lists, even after Food Network came calling. She smiled on camera, styled her tables, made everything look effortless, but behind the scenes, she was constantly second-guessing herself. Was the recipe good enough? Was her presentation too quiet? Was she boring? Too old-fashioned? Not charismatic enough? She worried that people were watching not because they admired her, but because they were waiting for her to stumble. And yet, she kept going. That's what makes this part of her story so powerful. Not that she overcame something and emerged victorious, but that she carried all of it while building something beautiful. That emotional tension is visible in everything she does. The way she plans her meals down to the smallest detail. The way she arranges her garden flowers just so. The way she insists on using good vanilla, as if quality could somehow protect her from criticism. People often mistake her style for perfectionism. But it's not about being perfect. It's about being safe. If everything looks and tastes exactly right, maybe no one will notice the fear underneath. Maybe no one will ask questions about the past. Maybe she won't have to explain why she's so afraid of being wrong. That's the emotional weight she brought into every dish. Not just flavor and technique, but the invisible pressure of needing it all to hold together. It wasn't until much later, after decades of success, that Ina started to unpack the emotional cost of all of it. The price of reinvention, the loneliness of carrying imposter syndrome when everyone else sees confidence, the exhaustion of pretending it all came easily. And now, as she steps back from her usual pace, as she opens up in her memoir and interviews, we're beginning to understand just how much she had to suppress to get here. Her story isn't just about food. It's about control, survival, and the quiet desperation of needing a life that finally feels like your own. Ina Garten didn't reinvent herself because she wanted a cute boutique in the Hamptons. She reinvented herself because she had no choice. The woman who once managed nuclear budgets had to burn down the version of herself that was killing her slowly and start over from scratch, with no script, no guarantee, and no safety net. And that, more than any recipe, is what she's finally sharing now. A star is born, but the shadows followed her. Ina Garten never set out to become famous. In fact, the idea of being on television made her nervous. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted control. But when the Barefoot Contessa launched on Food Network in 2002, that world changed forever. Almost overnight, Ina became a household name. Her warm, steady presence cut through the chaos of daytime television. No food fights or judges. Just Ina in her Hamptons kitchen showing you how to make roasted chicken and whipped cream from scratch, and making it feel like the easiest thing in the world. The show wasn't just popular, it was personal. Viewers didn't just like Ina, they trusted her. At a time when much of the media felt noisy and erratic, she offered calm and consistency. She wasn't performing, she was reassuring. And her show quickly became more than entertainment. It became comfort. For many people, she was the voice that kept them grounded while the rest of the world spun out. But here's the thing. The image that comforted millions was built by a woman who didn't always feel comforted herself. Behind the scenes, Ina was struggling with the very thing her brand had come to represent: emotional stability. She's spoken candidly about being an introvert, someone who prefers quiet to attention, routine to disruption. But that personality doesn't exactly align with the demands of television. The Food Network's expectations were high. More episodes, more specials, more promotion. And as her cookbooks began topping bestseller lists and her product lines expanded, so did the pressure to keep up the image, the soft voice, the easy smile, the air of complete control. What began as a creative outlet slowly became something much heavier, a role she couldn't break out of. The dissonance between how she felt and how she appeared created a kind of emotional tension that never fully went away. She didn't want to fake anything, but she also didn't want to expose what she was really dealing with, especially the lingering trauma from her childhood, or the fact that she constantly feared being judged. Even as millions celebrated her for being different, older, quieter, less theatrical, Ina couldn't shake the worry that she didn't belong, that she wasn't thin enough, trendy enough, or camera-ready enough for a medium that often favors flash over substance. There's an invisible pressure that comes with being a comfort figure in the public eye. People don't just admire you, they rely on you. They start to project their own needs onto you. And for Ina, that meant maintaining a near-constant image of serenity. No matter what she was feeling inside, the expectation was always the same. Be gentle, be warm, be safe. That demand, over time, became isolating because she didn't always feel safe herself. She didn't always feel calm, but she had to be, for everyone else. How do you admit you're unraveling when the entire world thinks you're the one holding everything together? The irony is hard to ignore. Ina became a symbol of emotional security, while privately carrying decades of emotional insecurity. It's not that she wasn't good at what she did. She was exceptional. But success didn't erase the old fears. If anything, it amplified them. In interviews, she's talked about how that critical voice in her head, the one that told her she wasn't enough, didn't come from the media or her audience. It came from her mother. The negative voice in my head, she once said, was my mother's. It's one of the most revealing things she's ever shared, because it tells you everything about where her self-doubt comes from. It wasn't just external pressure, it was internalized conditioning. Her mother had discouraged affection, dismissed her creativity, praised intellectual achievement, but rejected emotional openness. So when Ina stepped into a world that required both public confidence and personal vulnerability, she didn't feel prepared. She felt exposed. That fear shaped many of her choices, especially when it came to privacy. While other celebrities leaned into the culture of oversharing, Ina drew strict boundaries. She rarely posted about her marriage beyond sweet, surface-level anecdotes. She almost never discussed her childhood. She avoided politics. She didn't try to make herself relatable by showing raw, unfiltered moments on social media. She curated her presence with precision, not because she was hiding something malicious, but because she didn't feel safe doing it any other way. There was also another kind of pressure, subtler but persistent, the pressure to look a certain way. Ina's refusal to conform to diet culture or body image trends has made her an icon to many. But early in her career, that refusal was seen as defiant. She wasn't the thin, hyper-energized chef people were used to seeing on television. She was soft-spoken. She had a fuller figure. She wore button-down shirts instead of branded aprons. Her hair was neatly bobbed, her style consistent. And she wasn't interested in changing any of it to fit expectations. But that kind of quiet defiance takes a toll. It's hard to stand your ground when the unspoken rules of the industry are working against you. She knew that by not sharing more of her private life, she was risking media disengagement. She knew that by not dieting or changing her appearance, she was opening herself up to scrutiny. And yet, she held firm, even when it left her feeling isolated in a world she was helping to shape. Her introversion, her anxiety, and her deep discomfort with judgment never went away. They just became part of the process. She learned how to work around them, how to prepare for shoots in advance, how to mentally rehearse interviews, how to protect her energy by keeping the set environment as quiet and predictable as possible. But none of that meant she was at ease. It meant she was adapting, the same way she always had. Not to thrive in chaos, but to survive it. It's important to understand that none of this takes away from Ina's talent. If anything, it deepens the respect you feel for her. Because everything she created, every dish, every book, every episode, was made under the weight of expectations she never asked for. She gave people comfort while carrying her own discomfort. And she did it without ever compromising who she was. That kind of integrity is rare, but it's also lonely. What we're seeing now, as she opens up in new interviews and reflects on her past, is a woman who's tired of managing the illusion. Not because it was fake, but because it was incomplete. The smile was real. The food was real. But the silence, the long, careful silence around everything she didn't say, that's what she's ready to let go of. And when she does, it won't just be a reveal. It'll be a release. That's the shift we're witnessing. Not the end of Ina Garten's story, but the beginning of something more honest. Something a little messier, a little more human, a little more free. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.